Good morning, everybody. Hopefully we can all see my slides. I am Chris Corey, one of the product managers for DataPower Gateways. I'm excited to see everybody here today for this. And again, thank you for all being DataPower users. We'd like to talk about some new exciting things happening with DataPower. I think the obvious thing is you've all have begun to hear about the new X3 DataPower hardware appliance. So we really want to get into a little more detail on that, along with other things happening in the DataPower world. So thank you very much, and let's get going. So as a lot of you know, right, we have many choices about how we deploy DataPower. It's really all about having this gateway available where you need it, right? And, we have our physical form factor, which is clearly, the DMZ ready, most secure DataPower. It's the original DataPower, very popular and very important in the security market. So the physical DataPower has been there. We've always had that, or, in the last 10 years or so, have had a little less than that, have had the virtual DataPower, which started out as just a VMware for those who had, a VMware virtualized data center. And then more recently, over the years, we have moved into the Linux form factor. So RHEL Linux, container-based. So it's a Docker container, but allowing us for Kubernetes and OpenShift. And of course, for the IBM Cloud Pak for integration, DataPower is a key component of that as well. So DataPower is going to be available where you need it. And these are all critical, what I consider critical and important deployment choices for DataPower moving forward. So there is no, every one of these has an important roadmap moving forward, right? So we're going to continue with all these, we have, till the end of the decade or beyond for all these different form factors to make DataPower available for you. You would want to choose the form factor based on a variety of needs. And we'll get into some of that actually a little later, but how I choose my different form factors. But first off today, because I think most of you are here to hear about the X3, let's start with that. Excuse me one second. Sorry. So, as you know, DataPower has been around a long time. We have, worked from the web services and the SOAP space all the way to the API and now event spaces as well, with all the modern protocols and traditional protocols. This chart, right, we go back to, and many of our customers and people on this phone call as well, probably go back to when we had the multicolored DataPowers, the green for acceleration to the blue for integration. So this goes back to the XS40, the XI50, and we even go back before this, just couldn't fit them on the slide. About 11 years ago, we really went to a faster, more cores. But then in 2014, the IBM DataPower Gateway evolved from all that, which became a one hardware appliance that can meet all the requirements the other boxes did, but with optional modules. So that was the IBM DataPower Gateway. These are going end of service, end of support in June of next year, so June of 2023. As part of that, a few years later, we introduced the X2. Again, increasing performance, evolutionary, not revolutionary change over time. We are now excited to introduce the DataPower X3. So we spent a lot of time working on that name, but the X3 is the next improvement of DataPower. Again, revolutionary, not evolutionary, but being able to handle the latest in workloads, the latest in performance requirements. Sorry, what does this mean? Well, if we go back, to that IBM DataPower Gateway, they're all fit in the same rack space. So they're all 2U rack units. When we went from the IBM DataPower Gateway to the X2, we're saying 1.5 to 2 to be safe here. We got better than that, but a 2x to 3x performance improvement between those two form factors. We're looking at about another 1.5 to 2 doubling again from the X2 to the new X3. Mileage may vary, results will vary on this. But again, performance improvement. How are we doing this? Well, we're going from 192 gigabytes of memory up to 256 gigabytes. What does that mean? It basically means that we can run transactions a little faster. It's got faster memory, but we can also have more and larger transactions in memory at a time. In the IBM DataPower Gateway, we had 20 cores or 40 threads of execution. In the X2, 24 cores, 48 threads, and now we're at 32 cores or 64 threads. So again, more concurrent transaction processing. So again, it's really just evolutionary, but big evolutionary jumps of performance. Flash memory, this is the place where you'd store your configuration, so you're not going to see a big change. On the network side, though, right, we are now moving up to 40 gigabit Ethernet. So most, that's been a request from a lot of our customers, and a lot of our customer data centers now use 40 gig Ethernet as a standard. There will still be the 10 gig Ethernets and some 1 gig Ethernets as well in the box. So, before, in certain use cases, let's say on an X2 or an IDG, we were actually network constrained, not as much as we were processor constrained. So opening up the network speeds even higher. This is DataPower's first foray, let's say, into solid state disks. So again, a mirrored RAID array of 1.6 gig solid state disks. Again, you can store more information locally if it's logging information or things like that. Same speeds, basically, and things like the RAID controller. And when we get to things like customer replaceable units and field replaceable units, the idea is to make this as fixable, right, out in the field and by yourselves as possible, to minimize any repair time or downtime if you do run into an issue in data power, which again is pretty rare, but just in case something like that happens. So just a few highlights here, right? Again, I've said it many times, but it's really the next generation platform. It's really our proven architecture, right? So we know it's be highly capable of supporting all current workloads, and with those extra cores, memory, and there's some other things in the firmware underpinning all this, right, is very much future-proofed as well. The same hardware security, like intrusion detection, trusted platform modules that make sure that the firmware is tied into the hardware. And again, we mentioned the processing capacity and network capacity. You will always get a minimum of 5 years of support from the data purchase of any DataPower appliance. Even if you bought an X2 today, which is still available for a little bit, right? You would have that 5 years. As part of this, we are introducing a new level of our firmware, which is the 10.5 long-term support of our firmware, which we'll get into a little more detail on in a moment. And we mentioned about how we've kept the customer and field replaceable capabilities very similar to the X2 to make this as fixable or maintainable in the field and by you as possible. So, excuse me one second. 10.5, our latest firmware. We're going to have a staggered rollout of this firmware. So the X3 appliance GAs on May 31st. I'm sorry. I think it says date subject to change, and I didn't update this slide, so my bad there. But it's May 31st, the end of the month. It was just announced a couple weeks ago. And that will come out with the with 10.5, only available on that. In June, we will add container-based support for the 10.5 firmware. In August-ish, we will have our VMware OVA solution, the X2 appliances, RHEL will all be then rolled into 10.5. In October, we're looking at having it for the IDG. However, I want to be very clear here, it'll be a migration-only firmware capability. So 10.5 will not run transactions or normal capabilities in 10.5 in the IDG appliance, but can be used to take, let's say, a secure backup that can then be restored to the to an X3 appliance. Now, at the end of this month, our GA is for the standard X3 appliance. Later in the summer, in August, the HSM version of the X3 will be generally available as well. So there's also, I don't have a slide on that, but a slight stagger as well, which will have in the HSM board a FIPS 140-3 capability. So that would be in August. So again, a slight staggering of the two things. So let's, talk about the migration briefly between the two. So if I'm, between an IDG to an X3, let's say, which would be the normal migration, we'd assume most people, or most of you who have X2s in production probably will maintain X2s for a while. Some will move up and they can run 10.5, and it's a very simple migration. So starting in October, when we have the 10.5 migration firmware available, right, the recommended method will be a secure backup and restore. This moves complete appliance configuration between these appliances. So your keys, your search, your network configs, domain services, all get moved. As I said earlier, on the IDG, we'll allow that. We will not allow you to run a 10.5 on the IDG in production running transactions. You can't now on the HSM version, you will have the ability to not, it won't actually migrate the private keys in secure backup because they're stored securely on the HSM. That will have to be a separate movement of the keys to it. I want to also specifically say the X2 appliance. So if those of you who do happen to upgrade from X2s to IDGs, in August, 10.5 will run directly on an X2. So remember, the X2 is supported for at least another 5 years, till 2027. So you will have the capability to run 10.5 and beyond on the X2 fully in production. So my statement about only secure backup, only migration is specifically about the IDG. In the meantime, before that firmware comes available for the IDG, there are standard export and import capabilities, manually move the keys and set up the network configuration. So there are other ways of migrating if you want to migrate before the October timeframe when that becomes available. API Connect, so the CP4I of 10.5, again, I mentioned comes out in June, the container version. 10.5 will align under API Connect with the next LTS of API Connect, which I believe is going to be 10.0.5. So we'll have a table there explaining version relationships. The numbers won't be exact anymore, but 10.0.5 would be the compatible version of API Connect LTS with DataPower LTS at that point for the X3s. We have a just for how you would do this, a simple flow chart moving, coming in October again, how you would move between the two. Quite simply, because you can't run it, you would have to upgrade to 10.5 on an IDG, do your backup. You would then downgrade to either a 10.01 LTS, or if you wanted the closest to 10.5, you could do a mod release of 10.04. And that would get you all the capabilities that are in, almost all the capabilities that are in 10.5, if you needed to run anything side by side. And then you'd basically secure, restore that, test it, and move forward. If you have issues, obviously work with our support people and make that happen. So that is our X3 in a nutshell. I also have Steve Kahn on here as well. I want to see if he wanted to add anything I might have skipped over or any important details he wanted to bring up.
No, Chris, I think you've hit all the key points here. I don't really have anything more to add at this point on, especially the migration. This is just a reminder that this upgrade option for secure backup and secure restore will be available in the October timeframe for the IDG. So just kind of a reminder of the timeline for that. One of the things that we are doing in parallel to help clients who want to move from IDG to an X3 prior to that, we will be publishing at the end of this month a document that's a step-by-step migration guide using export-import to be able to simplify the migration from the IDG to the X3. So that'll be published. We can post that out on the community site, and we will make that available. It really, we're in the final editing stages of that. It's very complete, and will really make the migration using export-import very understandable and explainable as part of that documentation.
Great, thank you so much. And yeah, so the X2, by the way, and X2 will have compatible HSM. It's the IDG that has a different that wouldn't be compatible at that point in the keys and certs. And when we do that, just to answer that question, let's move on to more now what we're doing more in the firmware side of things, right? Which is, the X3 and X2, once we move on from the IDGs in a sense, right, allow us to keep innovating in the firmware side and the software side of what we're doing. So it's more than just the physical appliance that we're, as I said earlier, we have form factors for everything. So with cloud native, public cloud deployment, we really want to work on simplifying, automating gateway operations and DevOps procedures, which I'll talk about a little bit today. Obviously latest standards and protocols. We started with web services and SOAP, moved into REST and APIs, and now more events-based as well, Kafka, AMQP, HTTP2. Part of 10.5 is we have introduced a new user interface. It's in preview mode in 10.5. It's much faster and it's a really nice experience. I'll show you a quick screenshot and discuss it in a little bit more detail in a minute. Web GUI is still in there for those of you concerned. If you remember, about 9 months ago, we did announce deprecation of Blueprint. So Blueprint is not in 10.5. Actually, we mentioned about a year ago. So what am I doing in very high level? This is not a deep roadmap presentation, but a very high level where I'm going with the product, right? We mentioned earlier those investment areas. So that public cloud adoption, OpenShift containers, new transport and messaging protocols, really moving into a GitOps, a direct GitOps space. So over time, and we will, stay tuned. There's going to be much more detail on this coming, as we move forward in this year into next year. But trying to unify a DevOps experience or a GitOps experience for, container-based data power with physical and VMware data power. So it's going to be a much cleaner and nicer, I believe, DevOps experience. The new web interface, new probe in there, or debug probe tools, much nicer looking, much more modern, much faster. Working on the latest industry security certifications. So things like FIPS 140-3 are all part of this. You all know why we use a gateway for that security, control, integration, optimization. The core principles of data power, remain, We want to be the highest security for message and protocol protection. Still want to maintain that, that best-in-class control of and protection of applications with traffic limiting, throttling, error handling, routing, integration, moving and being able to bridge and work with traditional protocols and modern protocols in identical ways to make it easy. So, the core foundation of data power remains the same here. That's the important element. A new user interface I mentioned. This is based on our Carbon 10 capabilities, which is a standard within IBM. If you're in a Cloud Pak and you're doing MQ or eventually API Connect or all the other ACE, the other capabilities, we wanted to have a more standardized look and feel of the user interface and capability in there. So it's a much more modernized experience. Once again, not the pop-up window experience of today. It is a much faster user interface. So technically it works as a single page application. And so it all comes down to your local browser, let's say your local laptop, and it communicates back to data power with like SOMA or REST interface calls to be much, much smaller. So instead of having to develop or build pages on the fly in it with an engine, it basically has it all as a single page application with smaller bits of information being sent back and forth to data power. So it's a great experience. It's in technical preview today. We will be completing the interface as the year goes on. So it'll have more and more capabilities as the year. We're also introducing a new debug probe. I know we all love the original probe, and that's still in there right now, and it will be. But the new probe is going to be fantastic. It will be much lighter. It'll have the same capabilities, but be much lighter weight against the appliance itself or against data power itself. And as we get closer, I'll be more than happy have individual conversations or introduce and maybe do a separate session where we'll run through the new interface in a lot more detail with everybody as we move along here. Now, we talk about having all these different gateway experience, these different gateway form factors. What does that mean? What do I want? What am I looking at doing with them? So first off, when we talk about deploying to the cloud, we typically talk container. We can talk RHEL, data power. So, and then at the enterprise, that's either going to be normally the physical data power appliances. And I consider the VMs to be more departmental, organizationally scoped. They can go up to the enterprise level. I mean, anything can be scaled. So some things we've done over the last months to year, and we're keep improving now, is although in the VMware we maintain a 4-core minimum, and that used to be 8-core, and the enterprise, the physical is the physical, 32-core, 64. For cloud deployment, it's application scope now, so you can go down to a 1-core container on data power. And actually run what we call real production load. This isn't just a development experience. This is 1,000 TPS depending on the app. But now I can use data power to protect one app or a small group of apps, let's say in the cloud or anywhere I need it. We also offer things like horizontal, vertical, auto scaling. Again, I'll talk a little more detail in a moment about that as well. So a lot of work going on there to reduce the footprint needed to run DataPower. For example, right, DataPower typically has not internally been built as a smaller microservice pulled apart thing, but that new user interface, right, is a microservice basically, or a separate service, not in the main DataPower processes inside your DataPower. So it's our first foray into doing that. Auto scaling is going to be very important, and right now it's at the core level, so it's like 1 core, 2 core, 3 core, and it can go back to 2. We are looking in the future to bringing that to fractional. So, even if 1 core is a minimum, you could have 1.1 core, 1.3, having a fractional core on top of the minimum. So really be able to fine tune my DataPower for the requirements needed. Let me see. So for the container-based DataPower, right, we work now entirely within an operators-based deployment mechanism. This has really simplified and extended our capabilities for deploying DataPower, for monitoring DataPower. This works for Kubernetes and OpenShift. It's part of our Cloud Pak and just in container DataPower in general. And you basically can determine, here's my DataPower, here's my configuration I want applied, here's the size of my cluster of DataPowers. It will deploy those into the containers, into the cluster, and then monitor that and maintain that number of DataPowers at that given size for each one in there. So they can be, X number of 1 core DataPowers or 2 core DataPowers. It's always monitoring those and maintaining that cluster of DataPowers. The DataPowers themselves pull back using config maps inside to pull back their configuration, so that is separated from the actual bits and bytes of DataPower. As a best practice, this is something that's been modified over the last couple of years. Pod auto scaling. What does this mean? So vertical and horizontally. So I can basically say, okay, I want 3 1-core DataPowers, no more than 6 1-core DataPowers. I can base this, or I can have, I want my cluster of 3 1-core DataPowers that could be vertically expanded into multiple, into larger DataPowers. Things like that, based memory and CPU metrics. So it'll monitor memory and it'll monitor, the CPU levels, and automatically up or lower the DataPower deployment capacity as needed. This will also eventually move into, this is simple today, right? I set thresholds on memory and CPU, things like that. But you can imagine this will also be the basis in the future for when we move towards things like AI ops and other exciting features where we can really measure these kind of concepts on more dynamic ways and scale out the DataPowers appropriately. So what are some of my my form factor deployment considerations? Typically, the most important thing I find is it's best to co-locate your gateway with whatever application or service you're protecting, right? They tend to be chatty, right, between the application and the gateway. You want to minimize that latency the best you can. So, with a public cloud, you put a container-based DataPower in that public cloud, in that data center in the public cloud next to the application you're protecting. The biggest advantage is the minimization of latency. You'll also, again, these are smaller ones, highest levels of security because you're not hopping around the internet, right? Although, with the modern SSL level security, things like that. That's not as big a concern, especially if you do things like two-way SSL, things like that. But the point being is you're not hopping around the internet. So minimize latency. And of course, you have the same reliability if I'm in if I'm in an AWS data center, right, my application's there and my data power is there off of one network segment, it'll be basically the same reliability level for that infrastructure. So some smaller capabilities there. Things we have added recently is these. So some of these came in 10.01. Some, we've made improvements to them in the mod or the continuous delivery releases after. And now they are baked into our latest LTS or long-term support model, which is 10.5, or AMQP, Kafka, HTTP2. We can do some basic gRPC with that. We're looking at expanding our gRPC support. But today, it's really just an HTTP2 engine. Now, that all said, this is still, that what I call that magic of data power. Even with this new protocol, if I'm running Kafka, I'm running AMQP on one side, and maybe I'm running IBM MQ on the other side, or simple, whatever it is, right? We can mix and match those protocols. Data power does all that mediation between them, synchronous, asynchronous, and message reliability. And the other bit here is it makes the wire of the client, the wire bits of the protocol, right behind the scenes to you. So data power itself, whether I'm using, let's say in a processing policy, maybe go into JavaScript gateway script, or for some who are still doing XSL and things like that, right? No matter what the protocol is underneath, when it gets exposed in data power for my data power developer, right, it works identically for them. I still hit the headers exactly the same way. Now the header names may be are going to be different from Kafka to AMQP to IBM MQ, but I still reference them exactly the same way. So I can have the same multi-protocol gateways and services for both new protocols and traditional protocols, and run them at the same time through the same multi-protocol gateways and work with them identically. So it's really one of those secret sauces, I call it data power, that ability to mix and match all these capabilities, whether they be the latest or more. I don't like the word legacy or traditional. Traditional is okay. I don't like the word legacy because nothing's legacy, right? We still use things we've been using for decades in the IT in the IT landscape. Today, right, for DevOps, just moving on a little bit here, we manage the gateway configure. How we manage this gateway configure is optimized for each platform. So if I'm using appliances or VMware, right, we have basically data power configurations are on a local file system on that flash drive on data power or wherever. They can be remotely brought in from a web server with remote domains. And, many of you have written some amazing scripting and things like that to work with them using our command line interface or SOAP and REST. We use, basically you export and import from development to testing to an export, you export a whole configuration onto a source code management system and import it. You might use a deployment policy to update specific objects to meet, the requirements of the different areas you're working with. So it's really it's a good DevOps pipeline, but it's a very specific one for data power. Also, some will also use our data power operations dashboard as well, which does a great job of keeping data power configurations in sync and firmwares in sync and things like that. So that's how we do it today on the hardware side or on the VMware side. When we get to the container side and the cloud side, we have those data power operators now. So you probably do your development similarly today, right? You import, export, move it in. But then the operator, in a sense, takes the data power bits and bytes from the registry, like our entitled registry or your own internal registry, and it takes the configuration information and it deploys the DataPower. The DataPower then pulls back the configuration information and moves on, and it maintains that in sync. So it's a very efficient, even a more efficient DevOps environment. As I said, later in this year, I'm going to start talking more in detail about this future of what I'm looking at GitOps environment, so that your hardware appliances, your VMware appliances, or even your container appliance would all connect directly into a GitOps environment to get. So now no matter where I'm deploying DataPower or how I'm deploying DataPower, I can have a standardized DevOps experience. Because right now it's kind of there's two separated DevOps experiences that I want to begin to unify to make that my mantra is DataPower is DataPower is DataPower no matter where I deploy it. The other thing happening is, as you know, we've started integrating with cloud HSMs recently. Azure, IBM Cloud, were like the Luna-based or Talos-based HSMs in those cloud spaces, which is also a network HSM provider for us. Looking, or hopefully later this year, we'll complete our work to have Amazon AWS HSM directly capable from DataPower as well, and then move on from there to work with the branded HSMs in the different public clouds. Because over time, right, we want DataPower to have that same DevOps. We work with the branded HSMs no matter where you deploy it, on-prem. So the same IT skill sets are required, and it also doesn't give you public cloud lock, right? So I don't have the need, if I go to Amazon, then I have to also Azure. I don't deploy two different gateways requiring two different skill sets and all those. So it's a DataPower is DataPower no matter where I'm deploying it on all these areas. So thank you so much. I don't really have more slides, but we'll open it up for just answer questions that might be coming in here.
All right. Chris, let me go ahead, and there are a couple questions that have been submitted that I didn't answer on purpose because I wanted you to comment on these. The first one, on slide 18, you talked about some of the new security capabilities in DataPower, and the question was, can you articulate a little bit more, or are there any other security features that have been added on top of what's defined here?
Well, obviously this was not a complete presentation, right, into all the security capabilities of DataPower, right? Typically with DataPower, first of all, we talk about security in a variety of different areas, right? So you talk about wire and protocol level security, so you're still going to get, the SSL, the latest. So in 10.1, we went to the latest open SSLs, working on the latest FIPS 140-3 still, so that'll be eventually coming out, hopefully a little bit later this year. We are working, so you have the wire status of security. Then we have the crypto accelerators in the X3 and the X2 and things like that to make that even more efficient. We talk about with security, we also talk about authentication level security and token levels, right? So OAuth, OpenID, still doing things, LTPA, still doing things like LTPA, right? Are still a capability, although most aren't using that, but being able to ensample, which is still important, being able to mix and match all those. So we continue to make those better, but the underlying security capabilities do remain the same.
All right, great, thank you. Next question is about DataPower Virtual, and it's about some of the auto-scaling capabilities, and the question is around auto-scaling and availability zones.
So so first of all, let's be on auto-scaling specifically for Kubernetes and OpenShift, right? Because it's controlled via the operator. The operator, right, can deploy DataPowers into multiple clusters that would be in a different availability zones. Again, without having a real deep conversation here about the question. And so if I understand correctly, that would be if that's kind of a yes, no, it's a yes. You could have different gateway clusters that would do this. This is one of those things that, by the way, I would be happy if whoever asked that question, and I don't know, I apologize, could reach out to their local representative, and we'd be happy to have a deeper conversation.
Yeah, Chris, I'll let you know who submitted that question when we get done.
I do see a question here about patterns on DataPower.
Right. That question came up when you were talking about the new Carbon 10 UI.
Yeah. So Blueprint, right, was based on a patterns user interface that started before Blueprint. That has been removed. So what we call those patterns in Blueprint are not available in the Carbon interface or the Web GUI. We had a very low adoption of that. So apologize if anybody has to move on from that. You'll move into different directions using things like deployment policy objects and things like that. And we're improving the DevOps experience in many other ways.
Okay. The next question, I'm not quite sure what this means. It was, can DataPower provide functions in GWS?
I'm assuming you mean gateway script. So yes, right. DataPower there's APIs, right, that are called for most of the same extension functions, if I understand correctly, that you can call in XSL. So those, most of those functions are available. Not every single one is standard. However, there is the capability. We have a call between the two, between XSL and gateway script. So you could actually, it's an extension inside gateway script you can have an XSL wrapper for a function that just may not be available. Maybe a certain very unique capability that didn't move over, that you would put into a couple lines of XSL and have that, and that would then come back to the gateway script. But we have very close to parity between the two. Certain protocols aren't available in the gateway script that would be an XSLT, and there's very few things, but there are, if you look you bring in the different packages or the different modules, and they will offer the header module, which gives you all the header control, and a variety of other modules, and they will give you all the, those specific DataPower functionality.
All right. Next, and this question, I'm not sure if we're really going to have time to dig into this today, because I know it's a pretty lengthy topic. And I know when I get this question, I kind of always start with, well, it depends. But the question is best practices around deploying DataPower Virtual with high availability configurations, specifically deploying it in the DMZ.
That is a huge, it depends. Right. There's no real difference virtual or physical when you talk about things like high availability. Right now, VMware and those are probably, and the physical appliance are the best for the DMZ. Not so sure that most of our customers that would want RHEL and things like that, where you have certain application things, because we talk about VMware, right? You talk about in the physical, you have the DataPower operating system, you have the modifications to the protocol stacks and things like that we've done around that. But typically for HA, right, depending on your requirements, you can run, for very simple things, you can run mirrored pairs and things like that of DataPower. When you start talking things like OAuth tokens or More complex clustered situations, you want to run at least 3 nodes of DataPower to maintain that as well. So it's a huge, it depends. And I think that was from Valerie. So happy to have a conversation if we need her, get her in touch with somebody.
Yeah, I figured we could follow up with her on that.
Yeah, exactly. Or Valerie, reach out to George Innes and he can probably begin a conversation.
Yeah. And I'm happy to have a conversation as well on that. The next one I'll answer. The question is, will DataPower be available in Amazon Web Service as a service? For those that aren't aware, I think last week we did announce that API Connect would be available on the Amazon Marketplace as a multi-tenant service. And this is kind of a follow-up to that. Are we going to do something similar for DataPower? I'll say at this point in time, there are no plans for providing that as a service, as DataPower as a standalone service in the marketplace. We're always looking at additional capabilities that we'll be providing there. But at this point in time, we do not have an announcement for that as a capability. The next question I'll also answer, how much does the X3 appliance cost? That's typically not a question that we answer kind of in a public forum of this nature. The person who asked the question, I'll just say, please reach out to me directly, and I will be happy to provide that information to you. The next question is about deprecations, and I'm not completely sure what they're asking. It says, what are the deprecations? What happened to this? And I'm not completely sure what they mean in that question. So might need some points of clarification on that.
Yeah, and I think if we're talking about feature deprecation, right, the big one I mentioned, right, was the blueprint user interface. That was the big thing. We have also moved more recently, but from an LTS, from we have a separate set of MQ objects now called for the MQ-v9. That we've updated our old MQ client to a much more native, much more supportable MQ-v9, and that has moved beyond technical preview. That's not about a deprecation, but that's about the other direction. But the big deprecation was blueprint. It'll all, in the release notes and all that, I believe you'll be able to see any specifics you're looking for in that, if that's what you meant by the question.
All right, thank you. Next question. Will the firmware 10.5 support the latest JSON schema definitions?
We haven't done an update in the JSON schema at this point. So I'm not prepared to make an announcement or anything with the JSON schema at this time.
All right. Will it be possible to import an open API file and configure a service similar to the way we do it with WSDLs and the WSP?
So that is a function of the API Connect side of this, right? So you put in the Open API 2, and we're working on finishing up all that parity for Open API Connect 3. You put that into API Connect, and it will build and deploy the API gateway that is required. So that is through API Connect. It's not a native, let's say, in a multi-protocol gateway of DataPower or something. You would right now you would do that as part of the API management experience.
Okay. There's a question here about when will DataPower X3 appliance be available on the price list and available for deal registrations? That is available now. Actually was available on announce date on April 17th. So If you have any issues or problems with that, you can reach out to me and I can help you with that. There's another question I don't think we have time to answer, but if you can point somebody to where they could get additional information on this, Chris, please provide as many features in Gateway Script. It helps a lot for the developers.
Sorry, I was coughing. I went on mute. Sorry. Yeah. So honestly, as the features in Gateway Script, the modules we have and the APIs we work with are all defined in our Knowledge Center. Not saying it's always the easiest to search for what you're looking for, but that is the comprehensive set of the modules and the APIs that we support inside DataPower.
All right, so this next question I'll answer. It says, please provide NoSQL database support. Any requests that you have for new features and capabilities, please submit that as a request for enhancement. There's a standard process for doing that through the RFE tools. You can access those on IBM.com. When is firmware 10.5 going to be available for the IDG X2? Chris, you might want to back up to the chart that had those.
Let me put that back up for us. Sorry, we might have went a little too fast on that one. My apologies. Let me go find it as we are. Here we go. So right now the schedule is for August for the X2.
I think we've hit the end of the questions.
Oh, that was great. That was a very active question session, so I really appreciate that. Good active participation.
Yeah, I guess, I want to, Chris, thanks you for a great session and a great overview. Thank all of the people who attended today and the questions. If you have subsequent questions that come up after the session, this is Steve Kahn. Please feel free to reach out to myself. I'm on the worldwide team, so I think I can help address a lot of these questions, the more technical questions. Chris is the guru. He's been involved with DataPower for a very long time and has forgotten more about DataPower than I'll probably ever know. So I just want to thank him again. Chris, you want to give some wrap-up comments?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Steve. And that is not true. Steve knows. Steve and I have been doing DataPower a long time together, either for better or worse, right? So, but definitely say first off, I appreciate all your time. Just hopefully, as you can tell, we look to a very long and fruitful continuation, and keep enhancing and making the DataPower platform even more relevant for you over time with all these new features and exciting new things. So look forward to meeting with some of you over time. Moving forward, look forward to some future sessions where we can I mentioned certain things we're moving towards in the DevOps space. So I want to as we get closer on some of those, begin to present that to this community as well. Want to keep you more up to date and where we're going. Just want to make this more of a chat with you than just only a very, very occasional meet up here. So thank you so much. Thank you, Steve, for answering questions and everybody for hosting this and for a great session and a lot of activity. So at this point, let's go ahead and we'll close out this session.